My name is Atticus, and this is my biology project with Asher and Mason. The cycle that we chose to research is the carbon cycle. In this video, we will explain the cycle itself, and then we will explain the impact that we, as humans, have on the cycle, and how the cycle affects all animals. First, I will start by going over the steps of the carbon cycle itself. Step 1. Carbon is initially floating around in the atmosphere, and is eventually absorbed by plants through a process called photosynthesis. You may have heard of it. Step 2. These carbon-rich plants are then eaten by animals, and the carbon is transferred from the plants to the animals. Step 3. The animals eventually die.
What you say?
Bacteria aid in the breaking down of the bodies of the dead animals. Upon decomposing, most of the carbon is released from the tissues in the animals back into the atmosphere. Step 4. The remaining carbon in the bodies of the animals then sinks into the ground. From there, the carbon eventually becomes fossil fuels. Step 5. Those fossil fuels are then taken by humans and used. Once they are used, they are released back into the atmosphere, and the cycle repeats itself. Now that we have discussed how the carbon cycle works, we will apply our knowledge to the real world. We will look at how the carbon cycle affects all creatures, and how humans have severely botched the carbon cycle. Though the carbon cycle looks helpful on the outside, it is actually what's on the inside that is most important. Carbon is essential in the creation of DNA. In fact, without carbon, DNA wouldn't be possible. DNA is made of building blocks called nucleotides, and one of the prime ingredients of those nucleotides is, you guessed it, carbon. Because of this, carbon is one of the building blocks of life, which should be more than enough evidence that it is integral to life. However, in addition to helping create DNA, carbon gives all creatures energy. Glucose is the main chemical that gives animals energy. Glucose gives animals energy by breaking down ATP during cellular respiration. For reference, ATP is a molecule that powers most of the functions of the cells in the body. To find out how carbon gives us energy, we must look at the chemical formula for glucose, C6H12O6. You don't have to remember most of that, but the important part is the C6. The C stands for carbon. That means that for each glucose molecule used to power your body, there are 6 carbon atoms. Without carbon, your body wouldn't even be able to function. Carbon also helps create cell membranes. The cell membrane is what protects it from the elements and what keeps everything that makes it function inside. Carbon helps create cell membranes in a similar way to how it helps create DNA. It creates building blocks that create the membranes. Carbon has the ability to form stable bonds with other atoms. This helps it create lipids, which are used to build the cell membrane. So let's recap. The carbon cycle is one of the most important cycles because carbon is integral to the production of DNA, helps make glucose, and helps create cell membranes. So we now know that carbon is one of the key ingredients in creating life, but how have humans affected it? As you may have guessed, they haven't exactly been kind to the thing that basically allows life to happen. However, I think we should go into closer detail about how what humans have done has messed with the carbon cycle. When you first look at the pollution, it doesn't look like the worst thing. After all, what's wrong with more carbon? Well, too much carbon disrupts the cycle because it throws the balance off. If there is too much carbon in one area, the entire cycle can be destroyed. Much of the extra carbon from pollution is absorbed by the ocean, which leads to ocean acidification. When there is too much carbon in the ocean, it lowers the carbon ion availability. Carbon ions are basically the way the ocean deals with CO2. The carbon initially goes into the ocean by being dissolved, and then the carbon dissociates into the ions. This means that once there are less ions, the ocean will become so acidic that life will become nearly impossible in the ocean. And this is only one of the many steps of the carbon cycle that are being warped and destroyed because of humans. The atmosphere is also being filled with carbon dioxide, which is leading to global warming, and making the air quality globally worse. So not only will the entire ocean collapse, but the air will become unbreathable, and all because of those pesky humans. For more information on this, we asked one of our biology teachers on how the carbon cycle is affected by pollution.
So Mr. B, how do people have an impact on the carbon cycle, and how do their activities change the environment?
So human activities on the carbon cycle are, well, there's a lot of them. A large one is burning fossil fuels. Things like burning coal for energy, burning gas, in your car, airplanes, shipping, all that adds to increased carbon in the carbon cycle. That also affects the environment primarily adversely because as you add more carbon into the atmosphere, it's actually trapping the heat inside of the earth, which causes global warming and which causes just a slew of other issues.
How does increased carbon in the atmosphere affect the environment?
Well, like as we were saying, it traps more heat into the atmosphere, so you have an increase in temperature that goes to changing environments, melting glaciers, changing habitats for animals, and even by just a couple of degrees, it can be catastrophic to certain areas. It increases the energy and the violence that certain storms have, such as hurricanes, because the water's warmer, and that's what fuels hurricanes is warm water. So you have more intense hurricanes, you have bigger and more destructive storms. Those are some very large things that also happen with the environment when you increase the temperature from carbon.
How does pollution lead to ocean acidification?
Well, the ocean is a carbon trap, essentially, so it can trap a lot of carbon. Actually, it traps most of the carbon through the algae, but the problem is that as it is being trapped, it is increasing the acidity of the ocean. The more carbon there is that is being absorbed into the ocean, it's storing it, which increases its acidity.
Alright, thank you for your time.
Let's recap. There are 5 steps to the carbon cycle. Carbon is absorbed by plants, then those plants are eaten by animals. After that, the animals die. Once their bodies decompose, the remaining carbon sinks into the ground and eventually turns into fossil fuels. Finally, those fuels are released back into the atmosphere by being burned and used. Carbon and the carbon cycle also have a huge impact on animals. Carbon is one of the main building blocks of DNA because it helps create nucleotides, which are essential in the creation of it. Carbon also gives all animals energy by being a key ingredient in glucose. Finally, carbon helps build cell membranes because of its ability to bond with other atoms and make lipids. After all this information on the carbon cycle and how it works, you might be thinking, why should I care? It's a good question. Why should we care? After all, we don't live in the ocean, and we can always create indoor spaces with clean air. To those of you asking this reasonable question, let me pose one to you. Is human life the only life that matters? Are the humans the only ones who deserve to continue living? There are millions of species and billions of creatures living in the ocean. If things keep going the way they are, all of them will die. Do you think those animals deserve to be slaughtered, all because a business wants more money? You must also consider that living indoors for your entire life isn't much of a life at all. If you really think it is okay to let millions of species die, think about the future generations of humans. Not only will they have no future, but humans will be driven to a corner. We may survive, but life will become mundane and utterly meaningless. So to anyone posing the question of why we should care, that is the answer. Now, the situation may seem hopeless, but there are actually many things us humans can do. For example, people are building these really cool machines which use a process called direct air capture. These machines are able to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Once carbon is removed, it is put in underground stores of carbon where it can't hurt anything. People are also starting to rely on more alternative sources of energy, with several cities having already completely switched over. Though the world may seem dark, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and if us humans work together, I truly believe that we will have the strength to stop climate change and make humans and the world remain intact. Credit to these websites for helping us find our information.